All right. Hello. I think you're live.
Are you moving around fast there, Sean?
Okay, awesome. This is trying to change my background. Hello, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, that's the one that we're all used to. Good morning. Hi, Shantanu. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another one. Really excited to kick this off. We talked a little bit about Spec-Driven Development last time. I suppose we will be talking some more about it this time, but this time it's going to be a little more screen sharing, a little more hands-on. So for those of you that got a taste last time, then you've come to the right place. For those of you that are just jumping into it, I'll cover the basics. But Shantanu, do you want to kick us off with some quick intros?
Yes, awesome. Hello, good morning, good evening from wherever you guys are listening. My name is Shantanu. I'm a part of the development team at Zencoder. I have Leon with me, who is the OG developer advocate at Zencoder. And we are here today to talk more about SDD, Spec-Driven Development in depth. And we'll do like a small hands-on and Leon will be deep diving into more of it. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat. We'll pick it up at the end of the session. And yes, having said that, I think we can get started. Yeah, the stage is all yours.
Okay, awesome. So first, I just want to back up a bit, right? Because last time we spoke, I had talked about Spec-Driven Development at a high level. And one of the things I had mentioned was state tracking, right? I had talked about state tracking and why it's important. And we talked about that for a little bit, but so much of the conversation was around like the general flow of Spec-Driven Development that I didn't get to touch on it as much as I'd like to. And today I think would be a really valuable way to open up that conversation because state tracking is increasingly important for long-running executions. And with Spec-Driven Development, you now get to have really long-running autonomous executions that have a high degree of confidence in not steering off course, right? Now you can always steer each execution, but at the end of the day, one of the reasons that Spec-Driven Development is blowing up right now as a framework for AI first engineering is that as these long-running executions have more awareness of the actual context window that they're working with, they're really good at wrapping up a scope of work if they know what that scope of work is. They're really good at managing that scope of work within their context window. The thing is, they also know that that context window is finite. And when you're doing Spec-Driven Development, then that spec can be pretty large in terms of phases, as I probably will be able to demonstrate effectively later that you can have pretty big spec files that have a work that's probably more than one task in scope, right? So however you want to track your state, I will show you how I do it in terms of spec and progress files, right? Similarly, however you want to do it in terms of an external database, right? Or some sort of other persistence, like it's pretty cool open source framework out there called Beads, an open source library by a fellow called Steve Yeek. However you do it, a huge part of Spec-Driven Development is effective state tracking to know where you are across the execution, not just within that one execution window, but the entire spec. So let me show you what I mean. If I'll share my screen, yeah? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So here we have the spec that was generated from the spec agent that you can run in Zencoder. Now, quick recap, what stages are there in spec-driven development? There is specify, plan, task, and implement, right? So specify, you articulate what behavior you actually want to see. Plan, you and the agent collaborate on the right technical approach. C, break that approach down into tasks. And then D, finally implement those tasks one by one. So how did I get to this initial spec.md? And as you can see, it's fairly detailed, right? Well, great way to do that is to run a spec agent, right? So you can, so this is actually a internal spec agent that we created according to how we like to format our specs, right? So here, I prefer to have this as user stories, right? But that said, you can honestly have it as whatever format that you want. So if you want to have this as a JSON or .text file, then you have that freedom based on your own workflows. But you start with a prompt, right? Such as, let's say, you know what, let's actually run the spec agent. Right? I'm going to run this personal one that I have actually. And let's go, what do I want to do here? So this repository is for a game that I'm putting together to teach college students and, let's say, business folk alike about the purchasing process for different systems, right? So what about, let's say, a spec for an add-on that demonstrates real-world event impacts on the purchasing flow. And we will select our agent. Now we can't go with the auto agent, which is quite good and quite fast. Auto plus, I'm going to go with parallel thinking for now. And we will auto apply and let it run. Now here you can see the thinking part of the Sonnet 4.5 parallel thinking. Zencoder collapses these just for visual clarity. We're already doing a good amount of searching to figure out how this app works already. And this can run for a while, but I just wanted to, I'll come back to the spec file and then come back to this chat once it's generated a spec for this new feature. But that's kind of the point, right? Is that you can leave a long running execution to do its thing while you work on other things. So while that's happening, let's walk through the spec that I currently have, right? So for this game, I already have a pretty detailed spec that I generated earlier for the initial core prototype. And once I have that, it's time to move on to the technical plan, right? Now, the technical plan is the same way that I'm currently generating a spec with Zencoder here. This is how we're actually going to implement it, right? So we have React Router. And how did we arrive at this architecture? Well, there's a couple different ways, right? There's your preference, right? Are you a React person? Are you a Vue person? Are you an Angular person? Then there's the context in which you're operating. So what does your organization use, right? What do your teammates use? What is going to make this the easiest to work on together? And then honestly, third of all, the great thing about agentic development is that, well, let's call them opinions, right? The agent will have opinions of its own on the best technical architecture based on the actual specifications or the behavior that you want to see in your application. So putting all that together, I'm a React guy. Also, my teammates use React pretty heavily. And the agent already knows that because with Zencoder, you have multi-repository search. So with Zencoder, that agent is searching across all the other repositories in my organization to get a sense of the frameworks and patterns that we use throughout the system. So for those two reasons, and third, it's just a great fit, we're going with React and React Router. But it gets considerably more fine-grained and low-level details than just the high-level framework. And that's kind of what you want in this plan phase, because what the spec-driven development framework combined with very intentionally defined agents for each of those steps gives you is that you consider, or you and the agent consider, a bunch of architectural decisions that might not be at the top of your mind off the bat, right? So I had not been thinking about which icon library to use, for example, but that is a decision that we were going to have to make down the line. And honestly, once I look at both, I will have a preference. Similarly, like this, which browsers it'll work on, right? I'm a Chrome guy with occasional Safari. But you can see that here needs clarification is throughout, right? Because we don't want to overstuff the goose. We don't want to over-engineer this for platforms that we don't foresee this running on. For example, I might not want to prioritize Edge right now because frankly, it might just introduce a bunch of additional logic that I know is not going to get a lot of use. So anyway, the point of this, and I'm just showing you a small fraction of it, but you can see that it gets very, very low level, is to think about those really low level details that typically you will only encounter otherwise once you've already started work. And the value of putting all this up front is to make these decisions up front instead of A, having to potentially deal with conflicts later, but B, the more decision points you can address up front, the more you can hand off a long-running execution without the agent constantly needing your input on each of these decisions down the line. So it frees up a ton of space for you to actually work on different problems instead of constantly back and forth on the same problem, in addition to having a really good picture of what this is going to look like at the start. So we've got our plan phase. We can check back in on our spec. Perfect, still running. So spec, plan, task, right? What is the task phase? Task phase is where we break up that plan, this plan that we just saw right here, into discrete tasks that basically is a definition of done for each scope of work, right? So here we have phase one, setup. Every project needs to be initialized, right? And by the way, you'll see next to these tasks that for me, I actually like to track progress in the actual tasks file. You could have this separately. You could have this as, let's say, a separate progress.md, progress.txt file, or even you could define progress or track progress as number of tests passed or failed for each scope of work, for each task, right? I prefer to just have it sort of centralized in one file like this, right? So these X's here, these checks, these were not put in there by me. These were put in there by the agent once these criteria were met by the actual agentic run, right? By that long-running execution. So here we have the setup. Same with phase two. So when I was setting up this very foundational level for game sessions, for core components, for core state tracking, that's done. And if we go back into my conversation history, we'll see that each of these conversations is a separate task, right? Because, a different execution, because the agent knows what the scope of a task is. Each of these components in a phase, right? Each of these tasks are sort of discrete units of work. And so a phase is basically just a group of tasks that makes sense to run within one context window. And we can see there's still plenty of work to do. But the great thing about this is that now the agent doesn't have to constantly compact and summarize and go, okay, in order to fit this next phase and all these next tasks into my scope of work, I've got to somehow make room for it. No, it knows where to stop, where to leave off work, so that your next conversation tab or your next execution window, your next context window can pick up where you left off. And finally, the implementation or execution phase, well, that is kind of the bread and butter of Zencoder, right? So if I start a new chat here and I want to, let's go with the coding agent, because now we're actually implementing, right? So now we're straight up coding, and it doesn't need additional instructions or context from a different agent because all that is already contained in the spec file and the planning file and the tasks file. So now I can come in here and so at this point, because all of the requirements and the plans and the discrete units of work have been so well articulated, it's not just a huge time saver in terms of making those decisions up front so that you can have longer autonomous runs. And it's not just a great way to ensure quality because you've made these architectural decisions up front that aren't being stitched together as you go, but rather are going to work together to create a cohesive picture up front. But in terms of model selection, if you think about it, a lot of the upfront work is the most crucial in Spec-Driven development because it takes the most thought and reasoning and planning of different elements. So for that, you want to run a more advanced model. And that's why I picked Sonnet 4.5 parallel thinking for that spec and planning stage. Now that everything has been so well articulated, I would trust honestly the Auto Plus model for most things. But I could even go with, Grok, which is a slight trade-off of reasoning for speed. So if I want to get this really fast, then Grok. If I want a good balance, I could go with GPT-5. Or if I want our own custom implementation, which I do, then I'll go with Auto Plus. And now we can just go, we actually don't even need to mention the file. We can just include the current file and let's just pick it up where we left off. And so as this runs, and again, this is this tasks file right here, you'll see that it will continue to check off these tasks, right? And this is not the only way to track progress, right? So in addition to this, the agent should be making commits, right? Atomic commits. And these tasks tell the agent exactly how to break down those atomic commits. But that way you have this breadcrumb trail, not just here in your file system, but also in your version control. And that's pretty much the name of the game, right? Now, as you progress through this task list, as you implement, the interesting thing is that if the project is big enough, if the scope of work is big enough, regardless of how well you plan, something along the line will have to adapt. That's how it's always been for me. And if that's not the case for you, if you can plan a whole system from scratch and not have to change a thing once you start implementing, then congratulations. Otherwise, it's really great to be working on these specs with an agent because this spec is not designed to be a static object, right? It's designed to be a blueprint for starting, but just like when you are, building a skyscraper, you have to adapt and adjust as you meet real world conditions. So as the agent runs through these coding tasks, this spec will be updated accordingly. And you can do that with user permission, of course, and review those changes before they happen. When conflicts arise, it's important to be adaptable. So this spec is supposed to be and functions as a living, breathing document with lessons learned across these long-running executions. You can see what I mean here. So this execution, right? It's updating its to-dos. So as it's updating its to-dos, it's going through these tasks one by one and editing, creating files as necessary for that. Oh, okay, so for phase 3, exactly right, where we left off. If I scroll back up to phase 3, exactly. So that's exactly where we left off. So I didn't have, and again, you notice here that I didn't have to specify what we're working on. I didn't have to specify where we're picking up from, and I shouldn't have to. That state tracking should be baked into your spec-driven development process. And I hope here you see why. It's so that your agents are now not working off of specific prompts. They're not starting from scratch every time, but they're almost handing off the baton to each other, right? It's a team effort across different agentic runs. And the best way to do that without having to keep all that information in your head and to be able to review the work that these long-running executions are doing, because it's a different paradigm shift, or it's a paradigm shift. It's a different paradigm from what we're used to of one conversation at a time, back and forth. This is different. This is long-running autonomous executions running in parallel. And the best way to do that is with spec-driven development that I've found. And that's how you do it in Zencoder. I'm going to stop sharing real quick so that we can do questions, if anybody has any questions.
I don't think we have any questions coming up, but Glenn says hi to you.
Glenn, how you doing? Good to see you again. Glenn is a regular around here, and the attendance and the energy is always much appreciated. So thank you, Glenn. It's nice to see a familiar face. Honestly, I would love to hear from the audience any projects that you might be working on and how you're working on them, where you feel like this approach might benefit. Because the project that I just showed you now, that was actually born from a project that I worked on a long time ago, where I sort of it was originally a board game, actually, right? And so I had all these rules. I had my desired user behavior. I just, at the time when I built that board game, I had neither the engineering skills nor really just the know-how generally to build that out into something that can be, I suppose, used in production, right? It was an idea that I was passionate about, and this is when I was just starry-eyed and bright and ambitious, very early in my career. Don't get me wrong, still ambitious, but now I get to bring this whole project back to life, right? Now, otherwise, I might not have time to obsessively pursue bringing a board game to life digitally when I have a bunch of other things on my plate. But the really amazing thing is that now with the spec-driven development framework combined with long-running agentic execution, you can take these ideas that you've already have that define these behaviors that you already might have lying around in the closet, feed it through a spec-driven engine like the one that we've built in Zencoder, and then you have your vision come to life in this new agentic paradigm, right? And now you can share it with people in a way that you never have before and might not have had the time, frankly, the energy to bring back to life before. So whether you're using spec-driven development and Zencoder to build something entirely new from scratch and you're trying to define it, trying to break it down into specs and then tasks, or whether you are trying to bring something back to life, give it new life, then this is the way to do it.
Nice.
Glenn says, let's see here. I plan to analyze one repo built a few years ago, exactly, and make the specs for it. Start a new repo and implement from scratch. That will involve changing some of the tech stack. 100%. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? a repo that you built a few years ago. So that's kind of my favorite part about this, right? Is that most of my favorite projects have been things that I have built and then honestly hit a wall and then have had to move on and then come back, right? It's this cycle of like picking it up and putting it down when you have the space and the energy, just a little bit of obsession to pick that thing that you were tinkering with back up. And now you get to actually get it across the finish line in a way that would have taken like so many more iterations before. So I think taking something that has sort of like been lying around and transforming it with Spec-Driven Development is exactly the way to go. Now you can also start a new repo and implement from scratch, right? Because with multi-repo search and Zencoder, you've got 2 repos that you can handle simultaneously, right? You can initialize that new repo and then or however many repos, right? You don't have to have them all open locally. That's the beauty, right? Is that with every agentic run on every task, regardless of whether you have all the repositories open in your local directory or frankly, making sure that all of them are up to date, right? With the latest commits. Multi-repo search already ensures that. So this way you can balance the old repo with the new across the same spec. One spec, multiple repos. And frankly, I think that for any really ambitious project, that's how you're going to want to do it. You don't want to be forced into one repo just because those are the limits of the platform you're working with. And luckily with Zencoder, you never have to make that trade-off.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. If you have any questions, anything else that you want to ask Leon, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you're too shy to ask here, we also have a Discord channel where you can drop down your questions, and I'll make sure that it reaches Leon, or even you can send it out on Slack as well. But yeah, if no more questions, I think we can close out for the day then.
I just want to say one more thing.
Sure.
It's kind of something that I already said, but I really want to drive it home. Okay. This approach makes it easier than ever to turn an idea into a vision, right? Glenn, I'll get to your question in a second, but I just want to highlight that, okay, I have a couple of ideas in the closet that are perfect grounds for Spec-Driven Development to either help me generate the spec off of that idea or to generate the spec off of the mechanics that I've already defined in that, frankly, crappy version that I built a while ago, right? And modernize or bring it to life, bring it to production. At the same time, it's now easier than ever. Now, agents in general made it easier to sort of build prototypes of ideas. Now, with Spec-Driven Development, it's easier than ever to articulate an idea into a vision that you can deploy into real production to help people or to bring your idea to life immediately, or at least in the scope of time and energy that you have available to you in the course of a work week and a work day, right? So that project no longer needs to be a weekend or vacation project, right? You can have agents running in parallel, right, at any time of the day. So I just wanted to drive home the fact that with this framework and the technology, you can bring the things you want to life on your schedule instead of waiting for inspiration or a window of time to strike. And Glenn, yes, can I point Zencoder at specific repos? Don't want others to muddy the waters. Well, you can index. You can choose which repos to index and which repos to not index, and you can always switch those on and off. So easy as that. And then some posts from us. Fantastic. Yeah. that's short and sweet of it, or maybe not so short, depending on half hour is to you. But I appreciate everybody for coming, and hopefully you learned something. So any questions, you know where to find both of us. But as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much, Leon. Thanks again for joining in. I think this is super informative. I would give it a shot with one of my oldest repos. Try migrate it to Spec-Driven Development. And if you have any questions, anybody from the audience, as Leon said, you know where to reach us out. Our Discord links are in the channel. Just drop a hi, say hi, put your questions, and we'll be happy to take it up. Having said that, see you again in the next one, and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.